Laowa's Nanomorph lenses seem like a perfect fit for the Canon C70, so I rented them, filmed this acoustic session, and in this video I'll discuss why I think these two are such a natural pair, and why so many other anamorphic lenses won't play quite as nice with this camera. The C70, to start out with, just isn't really a great camera to pair with anamorphics because of the shape of its sensor. If you throw on a classic 2x squeezed anamorphic lens, you'll end up with an aspect ratio like this. You'll be cropping off a bunch of the sides, or delivering in way too wide of an aspect ratio for anyone to want to watch. So we really should be looking at lenses with a less severe squeeze factor, like 1.8, 1.6, 1.5, or 1.33. Pairing a 16:9 sensor and a 133 anamorphic lens results in the classic anamorphic 2:3:9:1 aspect ratio. This is kind of perfect, right? Well, no. How much of an anamorphic look you're going to get is determined by how severe the squeeze factor is. So if you're using the least squeezed lenses possible, you'll end up with the least anamorphic looking lenses possible. So therefore, with the C70, I'm thinking something like a 1.5 lens is probably the sweet spot, because you'll only lose 10% of your footage when delivering in CinemaScope, or roughly 20% if delivering in 2:1, which is Netflix's primary aspect ratio. Of course, I can upload this acoustic session to YouTube in any aspect ratio I want, so I'm just going to let it live at the aspect ratio it wants to natively be, which is slightly wider than CinemaScope, but still watchable. And if you're shooting with these lenses but need to deliver in 16:9, which is probably the most common deliverable for most people for most projects, you'll lose 34% of your image. Or you could look at it as having the ability to reframe horizontally by 34%.
Eric's called me up, he said, "Mark, we gotta make some content." I must have misheard him. I thought this was gonna be about anamorphs. Are you familiar with anamorphs? All right, in the edit, you're gonna have to go into Google. Anamorphs were a popular book series for tweens, I'm pretty sure.
So essentially with a 1.5 squeeze, you never lose too much resolution or end up with too weird of an aspect ratio. And the other reasons why I think the Nanomorphs work perfectly with the C70 are because it comes in an RF mount, they're Super 35 coverage instead of full frame. Usually on the C70, I gravitate towards full frame glass because of the 0.71x Focal reducer, but unfortunately with the current technology that's available, you cannot speed boost full frame anamorphic lenses because for the flange distance to be correct, the rear element has to protrude and it would physically touch the glass in the speed booster. So all that to say, the Nanomorphs seem like a perfect logical fit. So let's see how they perform.
All right, Sound It Out Films, we out here. Sat down in the corner with all my overalls, just trying to get away from all the years inside my walls. I dreamed the police heard every word I thought, so what then? I went to court and the judge's name was Hoffman. But fortunately I have the key to escape reality. And you may see me tonight with an illegal smile. It don't cost very much, but it lasts a long while. Won't you please tell the man I didn't kill anyone? No, I'm just trying to have me some fun.
So I shot this all handheld with manual focus. I did consider using these lenses with my gimbal because they're so light, they're so tiny, it wouldn't be a challenge at all to get it balanced on my RS3 Pro, and I could attach my focus motor. But I was envisioning a handheld look for this video, so even though it's possible, I didn't find it necessary. So I will pause here on Mark's hand warmers to let you all be the judge. I find with the 1.5 squeeze, the out of focus areas do stand apart from your classic spherical lens. It becomes really apparent once you have something like string lights, which we can look at here on my spherical Sigma 50, side by side to the Laowa. The Laowa gets you ovals and more variation within the ovals, but even if you're not shooting something with bokeh balls in frame, everything that is out of focus on the anamorphic is going to appear a little bit more vertical and more painterly. I found the Laowa's contrast and colors to be very similar to my Sigmas. It'll be a little hard to compare side by side because of the aspect ratio, but I'll crop into 150% on the Laowa, which is what I would do with these lenses if I were to deliver in 16:9, so that we can compare these lenses with the same field of view. I found them to be very similar looking, especially when comparing to my vintage Helios lens, which is much flatter and softer. So although they have anamorphic character, they don't look vintage. They look very similar to the Sigmas and actually appeared a little bit more punchy. You know, whether you're going for a contrasty lens or even a sharp lens, depends on the project and the vibe you're going for. But in general, I like sharp lenses because the C70 is not a very sharp camera. If I were in the market for an anamorphic lens to pair with like an 8K red, then the softness of vintage options would probably be more appealing. But because of the C70's natural softness that we're starting from, I tend to enjoy my images more when paired with sharper glass. So my biggest issue with these lenses wasn't really apparent out in the woods where there were a lot of organic elements, but during my apartment tests, which featured a lot of straight lines, it became very apparent that there is significant pincushion distortion, particularly on the 35. So a certain amount of barrel distortion is synonymous with anamorphic lenses and desirable to many, but pincushion distortion is much less so. But I'm of two minds about this. I think that in some situations, that distortion could actually be kind of cool. Maybe not all, but some. And when it is driving you crazy, if you're filming something with a lot of straight lines and you think it looks bad, there's a very quick solve in every NLE you use. My editor of choice is Premiere, and there's a lens distortion effect that you can drag on, add a curvature of 6, straightens it right out. Here it is just de-squeezed and with the distortion fixed. Before, after. So it's a very easy effect that you can copy and paste all your clips, or better yet, create a preset so that you de-squeeze, lens correct, and crop the image all with one click. But if you're not editing your own projects, it's just one more thing that could get lost in the communication and might make its way into your project, even if you didn't intend it to. One more thing to be aware of is that you cannot de-squeeze a 1.5 lens on the camera's internal LCD. You can only de-squeeze 1.3 or 2x. So basically way too anamorphic for this camera or barely anamorphic at all. I de-squeezed properly with my external monitor, and then in the camera's LCD, I set it to 1.3. It was at least somewhere in the right ballpark, but definitely distorted. So Canon, if you're listening, please give us a firmware update with a 1.5x squeeze. So to wrap this up, I very much enjoyed shooting with the Nanomorph lenses, and I could definitely see myself renting them again. However, because I don't have a lot of clients asking me to shoot anamorphic content, it really would not make sense for me to purchase these, but I'm very much looking forward to the next time I have an excuse to rent some anamorphic lenses, which could be these, or could be something new. Specifically, the Atlas Mercury series, which is coming out later this year, has caught my attention. Those are also a 1.5x squeeze, and unlike the pincushion distortion of the Laowas, those have pleasing barrel distortion, as well as a bunch of other really cool characteristics that, you know, come with a price tag that is in line with their quality. I don't really see myself using the C70 with a 2x squeeze or a 1.8 or a 1.6 for the reasons that I mentioned at the start of this video, but I am kind of potentially interested in testing some 1.3 lenses because I do know some talented people who have made really cool stuff using 1.3 lenses or 1.3 adapters with their 16:9 cameras. So that's something that I definitely see myself testing in the not too distant future.